get some questions, comments. The more that we get any questions or comments from the outside is great. So I will start by introducing David Gehm. It's a David. I gotta go Dave. I'm sorry. I'm sticking with the Dave. So what I'm going to do for both Dave and Sloan is I'm going to say the formal introduction and then say what I personally like about them. So, and I'm going to have my announcer voice on here. Dave Gehm has served as the president and CEO of Wellspring Lutheran Services, previously Lutheran Homes of Michigan, for nearly 25 years. Since 1893, Dave was not around then in 1893, Wellspring Lutheran Services has been caring for Michigan seniors and their caregivers. Wellspring provides a complete array of senior services across the continuum of care: home health, home care, hospice, respite, housing, assisted living, memory loss, skilled nursing, and rehab services. Wellspring Lutheran Services employs over 1,500 people across the state of Michigan and touches 15,000 lives with service and care each year. What I really do respect, Dave, and both for you and the organization, is the really cool way that you've integrated older adults with youth. It really, as much as anyone in the country. And I think everybody gets so kind of tunnel visioned in their 55 plus adult communities, you know, whatever it may be. And you've really blurred that line. And I think it would be cool somehow in the middle of these questions to weave a little bit of that into it. So, okay, on to Sloan Bentley. Sloan Bentley is the president and CEO at Lutheran Life Communities and has a 30-plus year professional career dedicated to excellence in senior living. Lutheran Life Communities is a system of senior living communities and services which began at Lutheran Home in Arlington Heights, Illinois, and has a history of faithful service dating back to 1892. Lutheran Life Communities serve seniors and their families in Illinois, Indiana, and Florida on 5 campuses. What I really like about Sloan is that in her career, she's blended both a nonprofit side of things and a for-profit side of things. And I think oftentimes that can be an artificial line of people doing good work. There's nothing wrong, you know, as I say from IN2L, there's nothing wrong with being a for-profit company, but it's also cool to be able to weave in just the benefits on the nonprofit side. And I think Sloan's been able to navigate both seamlessly. So with that, it's my pleasure to have both of you here. Going to throw a couple of open-ended questions out there, and we'll take it from there. So why don't I just start very generically, and Sloan, why don't you answer first? Just, you know, kind of give just maybe what have the last few months been like relative to, I think, the previous 18 months? Kind of what transitions have you seen with COVID in the last few months at Lutheran Life?
Well, as a whole system, there's definitely relief and celebrations. I'm happy to say that a lot of our programs in our communities have opened up to visitations. Having guests in the dining rooms and activities has been a celebration at many of our communities. And yet, we're on a roller coaster because with the increase of COVID cases, we have had some cases, certainly not to the degree that we had a year ago, but 1, 2, 3 outbreaks, some symptomatic, some asymptomatic, that are occurring. And the roller coaster is their emotions, that once we have a program that's open, families are visiting, people are dining at the dining room, and then we need to go back into a shutdown, it's very challenging. And as we all watch the media, the variants are scary. And so we are making sure that we are dusting off all of our policies, because we had all hoped that with our masks, that we have masks in communities, but in our personal lives, wherever our personal masks are as we go out into the greater world, and we were able to put those policies away as well. But we don't believe that the roller coaster ride is done yet. And so we'd like to say that we're hopeful and prayerful that we are past the majority of it, but certainly we are still on the road of COVID, and we anticipate that we'll be here for some time.
You know, I've heard a lot of providers bring up, you know, they say it in different ways, but almost like a post-traumatic shock syndrome from what last year was like. Are you still, you know, how have you navigated? Have you seen that, and how have you navigated that?
We think we're calling it the COVID hangover. Even though we still have COVID in our communities. And it's on multiple levels. Number one, We have seen physical decline more so in some of our residents just because they've been isolated and they're not out and about and have not been. And so what our programming has been from a physical standpoint through regaining strength and mobility, there's been a significant mental health component of it because we've all suffered loss the last year and a half, and especially our communities where very much has been on a lockdown and some major restrictions. And so those are two things that we are addressing within our organization of how to address this. And with the loss, it really is not only for our residents, but for our team members as well, because of the impact of loss of community as well as in their personal lives. And so I'll talk about that in a little bit, but we are definitely recognizing that it's multifaceted. And I'll just add to the COVID hangover, we've gotten lax from dress codes to some of the physical plant, where we store things. I mean, we had to find all storage for our PP&E and so forth. And because we didn't have visitors every day, we may have been storing those more up front than we would in the back of the house, etc. So we've had to take some fresh look at our how we look and are we tour ready and guest ready, as we have always been within our industry. But we were in, of course, addressing COVID, and it was survival. And now, as we're opening up more, we've had to take a fresh look and do grand rounds and a different approach.
Yeah, no, I'm wearing pants now. I didn't wear pants for about a year with shorts and everything being virtual. So you're right. I think there's all those little nuances of things that are out there. So Dave, what about you? The last 6 months and just kind of compared to the previous year?
Yeah, I mean, I think Sloan has sort of captured it very well. I think the challenge for us in leading in this field right now is to find that balance between celebrating everything we've come through and accomplished. And yet, I keep telling my team, don't spike the ball on the 5-yard line. And every once in a while, you'll see a NFL or a college game where somebody does that, right? And it's ridiculous. And yet, I think that's sort of where we're at. We're not in the end zone on this thing yet. And so you want to support people by allowing and really fostering that celebration. And at the same time, being very, very careful about, getting off of that footing of being alert and being vigilant and so forth. We just had a staff member test positive this morning, and we haven't had that amongst all of our staff across the state, probably, I'm guessing, in at least 6-7 weeks. And so it's just another reminder that you cannot let your guard down. And I think that's for us leading in the field right now, finding that balance is really sort of that fine line that is way more art than it is science at this point. And I think too, I think the other element of all of that is that sort of that trauma that folks have been through. And I'm thinking specifically of staff right now some of whom have been through very intense situations. In a couple of our buildings, we had significant outbreaks in the course of this thing early on in particular. And I'm just really beginning to appreciate and understand more fully the depth of the trauma to them. And our data is actually showing us that when we lose staff, we've seen a significant increase in the reason for folks leaving as being quote unquote personal and family issues. And so we're only attributing that, of course, to the significant change in society in terms of how families have to cope and how our staff are coping as well. And so we want to be attentive to that. I think that's next on the horizon for us. But clearly we believe we've been through the worst, as I'm sure everybody on the call today would agree. And yet we've got to find that balance.
You both brought up celebrating your staff. Start with you, Dave, on this one. I'll ask you, Sloan, too. But what are some tangible ways you've done that?
Yeah, so we're actually scheduling now in September a series of events around the state at our facilities and various programs that'll just be a thank you time. And our board will be involved and community members will be involved. And we're trying to figure out how to do that without saying we're done. But it really will be a thank you and a recounting of the amazing work that has been done, and maybe a little bit of recentering for the winter ahead. But we've committed to that. Our foundation is going to, pay for that, those celebrations, and help support our staff that way. So among other things, that's what we're looking forward to next.
All right, yeah, that's good. But what about you, Sloan? Anything?
Well, to Dave's point, just the stress, or we call it post-traumatic stress. And even though we know we're not done with COVID, we're just seeing that impact, and we believe that we're going to be living with that for some time, because everyone feels they've lost a year and a half of their life, and that's not including all the losses that happened during COVID. And so, and I had mentioned earlier about the whole person and the mental health aspect of dealing and continuing to serve in our communities. We are focusing on resilience. And so we have collaborated with a group of psychologists to put together a training and supportive program for both our team members as well as our residents. We call it Reclaiming My Joy, and working with both virtually on Zoom as well as in person now that our communities are opening up, and providing skills of resilience through this, how to deal with the losses. And so it's not counseling per se, it is a skill-based support program. And we have had trial pilots both for our team members and our residents with wonderful success and receptivity. And so we're going to be rolling that out in the next couple months, and it's train-the-trainer aspect that we're incorporating right now. But we'll do that through the system, and that won't be a one and then you're done type of support. It's going to be ongoing, because we find the depth of this is quite extensive with our team members and our residents.
Okay, great. That's great stuff, and I think it's all, everything can be platitudes, but you got to do real things, and both of you are examples of that. So we discussed, and I guess this is probably a good time to bring up, there's a few slides that both of you sent in, that the webinar that we did in October, we had a lot of conversations about technology, how that's been somewhat of a silver lining through the whole pandemic, and certainly we've seen that at IN2L. It's been, in this gut-wrenching experience of COVID, it was very rewarding for us, the thousands of people, of residents that we could connect with their families and such. But I think there is a lot of that, and Dave, you brought this up when the call last year, is that the technology was there, just COVID kind of became the impetus to kick it over the edge. And so really kind of want to weave into the technologies that were not so much band-aids during COVID, but more so, what are things that are going to stay. So why don't you go ahead, Sophia, to the slides. I do have one fun slide I want to show. I don't know if you've even seen this, Sloan, before, but I do want to start with that as before you start talking about your technology. Okay. Okay, notice the black hair. And Dave, I do not want any comments about child exploitation, but that is my 27-year-old, he's now 27 years old. And that was my son, Nathan, at, it was Lutheran Home and Services for the Aging then. But he spoke at a fundraiser. It's really hard to see the picture in the background, but that's a woman that was 100 years, almost like exactly 100 years older than he was, that he fostered this remarkable relationship with. So we got him in front of a whole bunch of donors that had been seriously plied with the appropriate beverages to make them free with their fundraising. But he raised, that was the first project we did outside of the state of Colorado. So I always have this huge soft spot in my heart for Lutheran life. So anyway, this is where it all started with me. And Nathan, thank you. Dave, again, please do not turn me into the authorities with child exploitation. But go ahead, Sloan, go ahead. I think we're going to show a couple of pictures of things you're doing. Just go ahead and talk to them as the slides go by.
Well, Reclaiming My Joy is really the specific COVID program for mental health and support and resilience that I just spoke to. The other slides, we have partnered with an organization called Casper AI, And we, with the overwhelming isolation that we've had to go through and the scary outlook that that may continue at some level, this is a program that's implemented into our apartments, which without wearing a monitor, we can detect if there is a fall or a lack of movement. And there's also some opportunities for individuals to control, such as they're pointing right now, door lock, thermostat, etc. So it's an added element that we are adding to residential and assisted living. And I know that there's a couple products out there. We've looked at several of them that have partnered with Casper AI. Next slide. For a little humor, we're back in the communities. This is actually a board retreat where we brought our board in to do model apartments readiness and had like an HGTV competition, giving back to the communities. But it was just a fun picture to share that we're back in the communities in a safe manner and contributing as much as we possibly.
Are the wigs like old British judges or something? Or I couldn't figure out what those.
They were the judges for the event. They're actually the community department managers, some of them, and judging the board of directors' work. So that's it for my show and tell.
So before I jump into some of these slides, just a couple of maybe overlaying comments. I think one of the observations I would make about what we've been through and what COVID has done to us is that if you think about it, my hypothesis at the moment is that COVID has accelerated trends that were already facing us in the field, right? So we knew workforce challenges were coming in the future. COVID accelerated that probably by 10 years, you know. We've known that the reimbursement system was significantly lacking. And so COVID has exposed that for what it is. We've known that regulatory challenges, particularly on the skilled and other higher acuity sides, have been woefully inadequate for the modern skilled nursing and rehab centers, for instance. And COVID has sort of exposed all of that and accelerated those trends. So now we're dealing with things that I think, at least in my mind, we had some time to think about and to work on. So, you know, Jack, when we spoke together here in October, you know, I had said that we sort of looked at this in sort of some buckets of categories around communication being one, the sort of innovations around how we support families and residents, the staff engagement and how we support staff, and then finally the clinical piece, the infection control, the clinical side of things. So, you know, we've really continued to be focused on those elements of our work in terms of using technology where we can and innovating. I've actually got a couple of just screenshots here that are illustrative of some of the things we've been doing. So this is our Wellspring U, which is sort of a play on words that is really nothing in a sense more than an intranet for our staff to go to. But what happened with COVID is the need for staff to have information and be able to access that information in a fluid, timely way rather than waiting for the next memo to come out, forced us to accelerate our commitment to get this. This was on our sort of plan for some time to get a full-blown intranet up and running. And we actually stood this thing up in less than 3 months at the end of the day. And normally this would have been a project that would have taken us probably 9 to 12 months to do front and center. So, so Wellspring U is a place where our staff can go and sort of personalize their experience, everything from accessing their payroll records to looking at instructional videos to looking at our latest sort of promotional stories and videos. It's all there for them. And so that's one of those sort of communication pieces that we had been working on. Another thing we did was we got into this daily pay. And there are other providers out there that are doing this, but Early in the pandemic, we realized and recognized that our staff were going to be stretched in lots of ways, including the financial stresses of what they go through, particularly our frontline staff. So here again, this normally we would typically take 3 to 6 months to get something like this up and running. We did it in 3 weeks, and in this case, staff can work today and get paid tonight, and it lands in their wallets or their Apple Pay or however they want to do it. And that's actually been a great boon for us, a good recruiting tool, and staff very much appreciate the opportunity to have that pay available to them as quickly as they need it. What's interesting is the use of it is very measured. I mean, we don't have people who are sort of abusing it or using all their money and running out by the end of the week or whatever. They're very careful about how they use this, which is really been a good and gratifying thing to see. And then finally, just my last sort of offering here, when we think about the clinical support that we have to give from our skilled nursing all the way up to our independent living, we've invested in this Virtue Sense technology, which is a falls detection and prevention program using some really cool technology that allows us to get baseline gaits on people and build therapy and exercise programs that are individual to them based on their fall risk. And as we've come out of COVID, at least the intense part of it, and begun to open up again, we're using this on as a baseline for everybody we serve across any of our campus-based programs. And we're also opening it up to the community so that someone who maybe has cared for their elder by themselves in their home over these last many months can bring mom in for a falls assessment, and just as a way of giving back. And so those are some of the things I think that have mattered to us, and I'm confident will live on as we go forward.
Yeah, no, that's great. So we'll go back to some of that stuff later. We're going to do a poll real quick to extract valuable information and also to make sure people are paying attention that are watching the webinar. It's got a dual purpose to it. So here is the poll question. Which of the following strategies has changed the most for your organization since the COVID-19 pandemic? Communication, engagement of families and residents, staff support, clinical delivery, all of the above, or other something in the chat box. So I don't know, do we wait a couple minutes? I don't want to mess this up here. I'm asking Ashley or Alicia the poobahs of this. So we keep talking and looking at a minute, or just wait? Is it an instant poll?
Well, we have a couple more just coming in, so we'll just wait a few moments.
Okay, and probably in Big Brother, we know if you're not answering, and we're gonna, Alicia might send you an email later. Why didn't you answer? These guys are tough. It's not easy out there. But that is, I know, Dave, I know Deepak pretty well at Virtue Sense. It's cool to see that kind of technology coming into play.
Yeah, it's very effective.
Okay, so we're gonna get to the answers now. All right, the rousing winner is all of the above. I guess not surprisingly. It's one thing interesting for me that I noticed, and I'd be curious, Sloan and Dave, if you saw this as well, is that everything always is it feels like usually these conversations float towards kind of a staff mindset or staff issues, and which totally makes sense. But one thing we saw was that so many of the older adults themselves, the residents themselves that had been reluctant to embrace technology, that all of a sudden when it became the only way they could talk to their grandkids, they'd go through the pain of figuring that out. So I'm just kind of curious on the communication side of, what did you see happen? And I'll start with you first on this one, Dave. What did you see happen right away? And are you seeing that stick too? Because I look at myself, my kids are all in their 20s. We play this virtual game called Catan that we never would have done that before COVID, and we're still doing it now. It's cool that it's kind of become a way to stay connected. So just kind of curious about what you're seeing with your residents.
Yeah, well, I think your observation of the uptake of that sort of communication technology by seniors is right on. And I think it sort of fits my comment earlier about COVID accelerating trends that were already existing in the market, right? And so we've certainly seen that. Early in the pandemic, of course, we were all scrambling to get tablets and laptops and other devices in the hands of our seniors so that they had them available to do that. I think what we're seeing now is it's just an expectation, and families, are providing those, and it's just almost an automatic that somebody moving into one of our facilities today is going to have all of the above in terms of devices in order to stay connected.
Okay, yeah, go ahead, Sloan, how you answer that?
We've had the same exact experience. We've also had a look at our physical plans, especially for rehab or short-term stays where it may be that the small TVs are not acceptable. It's the smart TVs, much larger. We just had to update some of our basic infrastructure as well, because that's just what the demand and expectation is.
How do both of you market? I guess kind of two questions. One specifically from a technology bent, and one just more in general. But just how has your marketing changed to prospective residents pre and post COVID? And I know it's hard to say post COVID, but with it being at least a little bit slimmed down, do you emphasize the technology? Anything else you do this differently? Go ahead, Sloan. Why don't you start with that one?
What level of living that we are marketing to? Certainly for our residential or assisted living, it's the resident, and they're interested, especially in the Casper AI and the motion opportunity and potential falls and those type of things. They're interested. As we go into skilled nursing, it's more primarily the families that are more interested in that technology level than the resident themselves. So we've incorporated it for all levels of living. It's just who it speaks most to depends.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. We've taken a look with our sort of behind the scenes internet providers that work with us on our website and so forth, and have understood that the search engines that are out there are seeing a different keywords that people are searching on in the senior space. And of course, keywords need to be embedded in your website in order for you to sort of slide up the list. And so we've actually been doing some work to incorporate new language from that backroom discovery, if you will, to make sure it gets into not just our website, but our marketing in general. If people are searching differently, then we need to be talking differently about it. And so things like infection control are showing up in searches. Things like safety, things like visitation policies are showing up in senior living search engines now. And so if we know if families are at home late at night doing that search, by the time they show up for a tour the next day, we should be using that language as well. And so it's sort of an interface of sales and the technology side of things, sort of keeping up with how the market is thinking differently about these things. And I'll just go ahead, Jack. I don't want to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
Well, so one of the things we discovered was that in our world anyways, our assisted living product is sort of the slowest to start the refill. And so what we've done is we took a look at our AL.
From a census standpoint?
Yeah, from a census standpoint.
Yeah, okay,
because if you think about it, our skilled nursing and our rehab is starting to refill because that is driven by a needs-based decision, right?
Yeah.
AL, particularly for families who've learned to adapt, is a combination of a needs-driven product and lots of other sort of lifestyle events that are going on there. And so that can be delayed. And I think the data I've seen both statewide and nationally is that's what we're seeing is AL is now sort of the slowest to respond to the reopening. So what we've done is we've said, again, based on some of the data we were able to understand, we've actually created a short stay assisted living model now, which you might have called respite in the past, but that language doesn't work. And so we're just saying to families who have been serving mom and dad and grandma at home now for the last almost 18 months, you need a break. Mom needs a break. Why don't you bring her in here for 2 weeks? And, we'll tune her up with our Virtue Sense. We'll do some rehab assessment. We'll get her on a strengthening program. You guys take your vacation and come back, and it's going to be a whole new everybody. And so what's interesting is we're seeing real uptake with that. And the first 3 customers we got with that all decided to stay long term. And so that's just us. So you asked, how we thought differently about marketing. That's one of the things we've done.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Sounds like a tune-up, like a car tune-up.
Yeah, that's right. Everybody needs a break, right?
Yeah. So, well, just moving away from marketing, and I'll start with you on this one, Sloan. I mean, it's just kind of from a strategic standpoint, things that you're doing differently now post-COVID than you were, internally, externally. What's a different world for you right now, just in terms of driving your operation?
Well, I think, and Dave mentioned it earlier, and it's true for every provider I've spoken to, and that's the recruitment and retention of staff. And as we have one of our towns, the Burger King shut down, and then they opened up, and I think they're offering $18 an hour. And then I saw Denny's down the street negotiated, the hourly rate is negotiable, which you don't usually get in the service industry at the Denny's. And so the competitive environment is at the highest that I have ever seen it. And so obviously, how do we retain our great team members? And that's been a new emphasis. We've always had a retention program, but we've had to turn that upside down, understand exactly what's important to everyone, what services and benefits are important to make sure that we retain those individuals. And then the recruitment is very different because we've always had a competition against the service industry on an hourly rate. And so what the experience, understanding, using more testimonials as we've done in our resident marketing, to do that more deliberately with our team member marketing. And then our benefit package is very much up into looking at local benefits, not only our organizational benefits, but equal benefits, but what's particularly of interest for that local community. So it's a new day, and I don't see this going away anytime soon.
Yeah.
And so we have a concentrated effort from the entire enterprise for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Dave, before you answer that question, I just want to show everyone on the call that I'm paying attention to the questions. So you have a specific question. Dave, are you using a certain software or company to track the data of keywords you were talking about?
Yeah, so, when my marketing people and the sort of tech wonks that they work with get talking, I glaze over. So what I recall is that the company I think we're working with is called Black Truck. And they do the back end of our website and sort of harvest the data for us. There's lots of folks that do that kind of stuff. And I think Black Truck is actually relatively local here. But there are hundreds and hundreds.
You're not mixing that up with like an asphalt repaving thing? Well,
I could be, but whatever it is, it's working for us, at least in that sense. But yeah, I mean, like I say, I'm an old dog and I don't learn these new tricks very easily. All this tech stuff, I know enough to sound like I know what I'm talking about, but then you start asking deeper questions and man, I'm out of it. But thankfully I got people.
I've done that for 22 years. So
yeah, I'm well aware of that. I
can relate to that. Yeah. So going back to what Sloan answered eloquently, kind of your own, and that was really relevant to bring that up, the whole staff thing, but just strategically, Dave, things that you're doing now differently than you were before COVID that are sticking, you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. And if this were a poll question, I would say all of the above again, right? Everything has got to get re-looked at. And, so for instance, I would just say communication in general for us, what we learned throughout COVID was the need to be transparent in order to maintain trust. I don't think that's going to change. I don't think you go back on that. And so, we made a decision early during COVID to speak to our staff and our family community directly through video, but on Facebook, so that the rest of the world could see it if they wanted to. And so that became our Friday installment of updates. And that's where we talked about everything we were doing and what we knew, and sometimes even letting people know that we had an outbreak in a facility and we're, having some losses. We were just out there. And what's happened since we started to throttle that back down as the world began to reopen, and we started hearing from people that we didn't even know were out there saying, "What's going on? We need to know. We want to keep informed." And so we've had to sort of restart those things in a way. And I think that's here to stay. Again, I think that was a trend that was happening in the marketplace anyways. And I think our staff expect that transparency. And so that, to me, that's one example. I think the other thing we've done is we've reorganized how we get work done, because we found that during COVID, with the urgency and chaos that was happening early on, we were able to get things done much more quickly than ever before. And I mentioned earlier, we got some things put together in weeks instead of months, and sometimes in months instead of years. And so as things began to slow down again a little bit, we took a look at how did we do that? And one of the things we learned is we had a very different sort of collaborative team environment that often included people who weren't normally at the table for those sorts of things. And so we've adopted a new model of what we're calling sprint teams. When we need to get something done, we form a sprint team that will drive that forward, right? Because humans can work really hard for a period of time, but at some point you can't run every marathon like it's a sprint. And so, we're looking at using, and we are using, these sprint teams to get things done that we need done. We can't wait for 6 months to sort of go through the process. And I think that's another sort of change for us that's part of our operating system now that's going to be here to stay.
Yeah, and I think I don't want to pretend I walk the shoes in your guys' shoes with all the life and death issues you deal with, but as a company, it's the same thing. You have to let staff have some flexibility,
Yep.
remote and such, and a lot of things. There were a lot of positive things that came out of it. I think we all learned that we can
Yep.
do a lot more remotely than we ever would have thought we could do before. But it does take a leadership flexibility, not to an extreme, but to be able to just realize that things are a little bit differently. And it certainly, as Sloan talked, with a competitive environment, you have to do that. So we wanted to we'll save this to the end, but we did want anybody that's in the audience that to just also answer that question. If you could throw in a little chat, just anything your organization has done differently since COVID-19 that you think will remain beyond the pandemic. And Ashley, I'll donate $100 to that organization's foundation, whoever comes up with what we think is pretty cool and creative. So, but it is, I think it's one of the fascinating things for me. My career, the first 15 years of my career was in the Silicon Valley, where nobody would tell anybody what they're doing. And I love how in senior living, there's been such a willingness, and this is not just with COVID, just in general, people, you're running businesses and you have to, bring more money at the end of the day than you lose. But I love the willingness people have had to share some of these best practices that again, a lot of times are pretty common sense, but they're not, until you bring it out, you're not going to necessarily know that. So there has been such a staff, Sloan, you were bringing this up, the whole staff issues have, from a retention standpoint, again, Sloan, you answered this specifically. Let me start with Dave on it. I'm just trying to think of the overall interaction between management and staff when you both have had long-term employees. So, but you also, there's short-term employees. I'm just kind of thinking of this, the dynamic of how you interact with your staff relative to before COVID.
Yeah. So, it's interesting. In May, this past May 21, Gallup did their first workforce survey in the COVID era, and one of the things they discovered was that there's been a little bit of change in how employees in the U.S. Talked about what they valued in their employer, and across all the generations that are in the workforce now. There's 4 generations in the workforce. All of them are now saying the number one thing that matters to them about their employer is that their employer cares about them, their well-being, and their family. Now, that might be intuitive, but now there's data that supports that. And so the question then becomes, how do we offer our sort of human resource environment, our workforce experience, our supervisory model that supports that, right? And I think that's a question that sounds easy, but I think it really goes to culture. And for us, I think probably all of us on the call today, that should be both an opportunity and should feel comfortable too, because it's how we operate in our faith-based space. And the fact that the number one thing workers want from us is that we care about them. Boy, we can do that all day long. Now the question is, do we have everything in alignment in terms of policies and benefits, to Sloan's point, and supervisory relationships and all the things that sort of go into that will deliver on that, right? And so we're getting really focused on in the retention space on making sure that our employees know we care about them. We always have, but now we got to make sure that we're sort of over the top with that.
Go ahead, Sloan.
I would add, it's interesting. There's a lot of management 101 that we think that we're really good at, but this has given an opportunity for us to look a little deeper. For us, it was caring for the team member holistically and the resilience training, as well as the customization of the benefits. What we're finding also, just professional and personal development is a whole area. Now, that's, management 101. Of course, we'd like to think that we do a good job with that. But as we're starting to drill down what's important to our team members and opportunities for them, and just even if they're happy with their position because they've been with us for many years, there's still development that can happen. And our skill level for our team members and our leaders, we saw an opportunity for development in that area. So that's one of the components when we look at recruitment and retention that we feel that we can make a very large difference in. That quite frankly, when we put back the curtains, it was more of lip service versus a formal programming, training, mentoring, honest conversations. And so that's one area that we've been focusing to follow up on Dave's comments.
Yeah, it's funny because I know we are going to open up for questions in 2 or 3 minutes. So if you've got anything, feel free to type it in now and we'll get it out there. But that both of you have, and your organizations have, and I think a level of authenticity that you can't really fake. And I remember going to I'm good friends with some providers that I've watched them go into their own communities, and they know the name of every, whatever the staff, whatever the level of person is, they know that person's name. They know their family's names. They know residents' names. You kind of have that in your DNA or you don't. I mean, you can read a book that says, learn all the names of your staff members, and that's a lot different than just doing it and really authentically caring. And I do think I see it with my own kids, is that they do, they want to work for a place that they feel some kind of a social connection to. They want to feel like it makes a difference. And it's a, not to be judgmental about anything, but there is a level of satisfaction that you're not going to get from a Burger King that you get from watching somebody's life change. And I'm sure it's difficult to always convey that in the midst of the toughness that you're going through. But again, I think that there's a level of authenticity that both of you have that's a pretty big thing. So, all right. So question, I think this is a time to are there any questions out there? I see something that there's been a growing trend in HCBS. Has the pandemic affected either of your organization's entry or acceleration into providing additional home or community-based services? Great question. I wanted to bring that up and forgot to. So go ahead, Sloan. You want to start with that? You both are doing creative things in that world.
Well, we have found childcare has changed. We've always had long wait lists, especially on the infants. And I think people are staying at home and caring for their children. And so we have opening in our infant rooms, which we just haven't had in the past. And we believe that this is not a long term, that it will level out because there still will be babies in the world. However, it's just an interesting flow that we have seen in our population there that we haven't previously. And of course, we had to shut down our adult day memory support program. And we had to, of course, start limiting some of our in-home care but we're able to open those up now. We find families are exhausted because they chose to keep at home versus placing a community at the height of COVID. So that change is, and that's on top of already an exhausted family. So the intensity, I would say, has ratcheted up several times, and I think it's just all of us dealing with COVID and the side effects and the aftermath.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. When we think about, folks caring for loved ones in the community, we know the number is growing, and it's always been around 90 to 92% of frail seniors are cared for in their homes or in a home of a loved one. So there's a huge market out there, right? So, I think what COVID has done for us is it's certainly undergirded our traditional home and community-based programs, but it's also got us thinking differently about how do we leverage our brick and mortar to serve those families. So like this comment I made earlier about opening up our virtue sense technology, the falls prevention and detection technology, to folks who live in the community who don't have any other contact with us, is an example of us trying to figure out how do we make contact with those folks, how do we serve them, and in the long run, whether or not we end up with them as a home care customer or not isn't really the point. We're sort of dabbling in this space to try to figure out what do these families really need from us as the sort of anchors in their community that know senior services. And now they're the informal caregivers. They're gassed at this point. They're just gasping for breath. And yet they're still the primary caregivers for somebody whose frailty is probably pretty significant. So we're really trying to explore the edges of what does home and community-based service really mean, and how do we leverage our core systems to support them?
Yeah, we were involved in a great project in Pennsylvania with a Presbyterian senior care outside of Pittsburgh, and where it was, as you were saying, Sloan, when the adult day program specifically for people living with dementia was cut off, they reached out to us, and we were able to provide 75 tablets to different homes that were kind of customized to be specific to the organization, but they very much were geared towards both the person, but also the caregiver that's trying to deal with them. And so I think that kind of thing is a very relevant play. I don't know if either one of you have seen this, but we're seeing incredible amounts of funding coming through the AAAs, the area agencies on aging, that are not familiar with technology. And so we've had great success kind of partnering with some providers to go to that AAA and say, hey, we can help manage this program to get technology out to a lot of times people that are so isolated that you don't even know, they're getting their meals on wheels or whatever it may be, but it's almost like they're the only contact that you have out there. So it is interesting, the creativity that's out there. So a couple other questions coming in. And it's always fun when I know the person. Kate, hello out there, Kate. And by the way, Caitlin, I do owe you $100, so somehow we have to connect afterwards. I'm a man of my words. I've donated money to both of these organizations. Might as well add to yours. But Kate has a great question. Kate, who's in the middle of all kinds of cool technology things, she's asking about robotics. If either one of you have either dabbled into robotics for the services you're providing, or thinking about it. Go ahead, Sloan, you can start.
We are bringing our baseline of technology up into 2021 from a few years ago. So we are looking at all of our functions, We'll be looking at new software and really in all of our, I can't think of a function that we're not exploring, the function leader is not exploring or that's budgeted. So in the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to be seeing a complete turnover. And so we're really are coming up into the current world. That's not where we are. Our closest place is the Casper AI and that partnership, and which is not robotics, but it's the most technology we bring to the apartment and the living experience for our residents. So that's our furthest foray into that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because okay, Dave, what about you? I would buy if there was a Dave Gehm robot. I sign me up. If you could be next to me every day in my office, I would. I really there's no limit to what I would pay for that.
I would hope I would creep you out, actually, if I did that. So yeah. So when we talk about robotics, I think there's this idea that we're talking about, Rosie the maid from the Jetsons, right? That's going around doing stuff. And
don't diss the Jet. There's a lot of stuff in the Jetsons that's coming to fruition.
I know. And I think elements of that are coming, right? But we're not there yet. In the meantime, I think AI is where we're at. And so, I've recently, really started looking at core systems that could benefit from AI. And there's an explosion of software opportunities out there that, might overlay current software systems that can then squeeze out more efficiency, help us do better. And so when I think about robotics, I'm actually thinking about those systems that can lay over the current systems that we have and help us mine efficiency and data in ways that we haven't done. So until Rosie the maid is ready, that's what we're going to be doing.
Yeah, totally agree. Because I think you're right. There's definitely cool stuff coming, but that AI stuff is here now, and there's a lot to be driven from that. So another question from Alicia: what challenges do either one of you think senior living providers will just face in general in your future, and kind of challenges you're preparing for?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of the challenges we've talked about, the known challenges worry me less than the unknown challenges, right? So workforce, big challenge. We got to deal with it. There's lots going on in that space. Reimbursement, big challenge. We got to deal with that. But we know those challenges, and we can assess them and address them as we can. I would sort of turn the question a little bit and say, where are some unknown challenges? Where should we be looking on the horizon for unknown challenges, and that we're unaware of at the moment? I wonder about two things. I wonder about what is all this going to do to the psyche and the consumer mentality of the next batch of seniors that will be, otherwise would have been lining up at our doors. What do we need to know about the next gen of seniors, not the 90-year-olds today, but the 78-year-olds today, and how they're thinking about their own aging now with all this? I think on the flip side, what new competitive models are being, conjured up in somebody's mind out there, or in some planning room of some organization that's not even involved in senior living right now, that is going to come out with some different models that leverage some things that we haven't thought about. And so that's where I go when I think about challenges. The known challenges, obviously we got to deal with them, but at least we know about them. The things we can't see, that's the stuff I worry about.
Yeah, go ahead, Sloan.
I think that we just, we're still on that roller coaster with COVID. We don't, I'd like to say I see that end, but we're not there. We have done across the board wage adjustments, not once, but more often, and in some of our markets. And I don't believe when we look at the next 6 to 12 months that we're through that yet. And that's just one example. And so, and I think that they brought this up really early, which was really a great point, that COVID has accentuated some of our weaknesses. And so that's why we're focusing what we believe can make the biggest impact. For one of the elements is recruitment and retention, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm. We also have, being of a similar age of an organization as Dave, our physical plants need some love. We have aged in place and not so gracefully. And so it's not just bringing up into the future, but bringing up to the current expectations
Mhm.
of our residents and being able to do that post a financial impact of what COVID has done to the organization. So financial strength is obviously, I think, is probably everyone's goal as we are coming out of this. And when I look at 1 to 3 years, that really is on the forecast. I believe, one of the wonderful things about our organizations is the diversity. And I think there's strength in diversity as we look at our current programs on our campuses, as well as our greater communities with our home-based community programs, and then what other elements may fit into our mission statements. So that's what it really brings that 5 to 10 years as we look down the pike. But we have a lot to do in the next year.
Yeah. And I know Alicia's going to cut me off in a second. I think one thing we've been doing that's been really cool is to be able to look at technology as a way to connect people with like-minded interests, to find the veterans from the same battalion, the red hat ladies that went to the same church. So I think, I'm so optimistic about what technology can bring, but that isn't, you don't want to be, Pollyannish just to the real issues that are out there. So thank you both. Or I guess, Alicia, you do all the thank yous, right?
Yes, I will. And thank you all. Just a quick follow-up. Larry Bradshaw and National Lutheran Communities also has the dining robot. So I saw some chat going on in there, and maybe we can have a quick half an hour webinar on that. So great. I want to thank everyone for attending today, and a big thank you to our panelists, Dave and Sloan, for sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. And of course, our always terrific host, Jack York of IN2L. If you have any questions about this webinar, please don't hesitate to contact our staff at Lutheran Services in America. We'll also be sending out a recording for you to share with your staff and other folks. And we hope to see you at our next webinar, which is By the Handbook, Staying Compliant in a Changing Environment, which will be hosted by Concordia Plans on August 17th at 2 p.m. Eastern time, and we'll see you there. Thanks again, everyone, and it was great discussion.
I'm sorry, Lisa, one last thing. It's just that this is not for an IN2L thing, but if anybody does, we know a lot about this AAA funding just over the last month. And if anybody has any questions about that, reach out to me or you guys, but it's a great way to get some of this innovation funded within your communities that was not there 6 months ago.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jack. I'll follow up with you as well. Appreciate that. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.